It began on a night when the desert forgot how to breathe. Marcus Dawson had operated the same garage on the outskirts of Barstow, California, for 27 years. The building sat like a rusted monument at the edge of Highway 58, where the asphalt surrendered to sand and the civilization of the coastal cities gave way to the vast emptiness of the Mojave. His hands knew every wrench, every bolt, every stubborn engine that rolled into his shop attached to 18-wheelers, beaten pickup trucks, and the occasional lost tourist vehicle limping toward Las Vegas. He was 51 years old and looked older. The sun had carved lines into his face that made him appear weathered rather than aged. His marriage had ended a decade ago when his wife finally admitted she could not love a man who loved engines more than conversation. His son lived somewhere in Portland, working in tech, and called twice a year with the dutiful affection of someone fulfilling an obligation. Marcus had made peace with his solitude the way the desert makes peace with drought, by accepting it as the natural state of things. He was not a man prone to contemplation. His world was mechanical, logical, governed by principles of cause and effect that never wavered. If an engine failed, there was a reason. If a transmission ground itself to pieces, the diagnosis was always found in metal and friction, never in mystery or metaphor. He had been raised Baptist, had attended church as a child, but somewhere between adolescence and adulthood, he had concluded that faith was simply another mechanism people used to cope with the randomness of existence. He did not judge those who believed, but neither did he join them. The desert nights were his cathedral. After closing the garage at sunset, he would climb the rickety stairs to his small apartment above the shop, crack open a beer, and sit on the metal landing, watching the stars emerge. Out here, far from city lights, the sky revealed itself in full majesty. Countless points of light reminding him how insignificant his problems were, how small his life, how temporary his presence on this spinning rock. It was on such a night in late August when everything changed. The temperature had reached 114 degrees during the day, and even now, past midnight, the air hung thick and hot, like the breath of some enormous beast. Marcus sat on his landing, drinking his second beer, when he noticed the silence. The desert was never truly quiet. There were always the distant sounds of trucks on the highway, the scuttle of insects, the occasional howl of coyotes arguing over territory. But now, suddenly, there was nothing. The world had been muted, as though someone had pressed pause on reality itself. He set down his beer and stood, his mechanical mind immediately searching for explanations. Power outage. But his lights were still on. Sandstorm approaching. But the air was perfectly still, not even a whisper of wind. His pulse quickened, though he could not have said why. Then he saw it. A shape materialized in the darkness beyond his garage, not arriving but rather becoming visible, as though it had always been there but had only now chosen to reveal itself. It was roughly humanoid but wrong in ways that made his eyes struggle to focus. Tall and impossibly thin, with proportions that suggested something had taken the human form and stretched it like taffy. Its surface seemed to shimmer and shift, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes translucent, as though it existed in multiple states simultaneously. Marcus's first instinct was to retreat, to lock himself in his apartment and call the police, but his legs refused to obey. He stood frozen on the landing, gripping the railing, as the being moved closer with a gliding motion that suggested it was not quite touching the ground. When it was perhaps 15 feet away, it stopped. In the dim light spilling from his apartment, Marcus could make out features that were almost a face, smooth, elongated, with eyes that were too large and too dark, reflecting the light like pools of oil. But there was no menace in those eyes. Instead, Marcus felt something he had not expected, recognition, as though this being knew him, had always known him, had been waiting for precisely this moment. The being did not speak. Its mouth, if it had one, did not move. But suddenly Marcus's mind was flooded with sensations that arranged themselves into meaning, not words, but concepts, not language, but understanding. Do not fear. The message was so clear, so present in his consciousness, that for a moment Marcus thought he had spoken it himself. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound emerged. His throat had become a desert within a desert. I have traveled very far to speak with you, the being communicated. With you, Marcus Dawson, mechanic, builder, fixer of broken things. The fact that it knew his name should have terrified him. Instead, he felt a strange calm settling over his panic, as though the being were projecting serenity directly into his nervous system. Why me? Marcus managed to think, not knowing if the creature could perceive his unspoken question. The being tilted its head in a gesture that was disturbingly human. Because you are honest. You do not lie to yourself. You do not pretend to understand what you do not understand. This makes you rare among your kind. Marcus's legs finally remembered how to move. He descended the metal stairs slowly, his work boots clanging against each step, and stood on the dirt parking lot facing the being. Up close, it was even more unsettling. Its form seemed to pulse gently, as though it were breathing with lungs that existed in a different dimension. "What do you want?" Marcus thought. "To show you something," the being replied. "Something about your species that you need to understand. Something that, if enough of you comprehend it, might change the trajectory of what is coming." "What's coming?" The being extended one long, thin appendage toward him. Where a human hand would have been, there was something more complex. Fingers that branched into smaller fingers, creating a fractal pattern that hurt to look at directly. "Touch," it invited. Every instinct screamed at Marcus to refuse, to run, to protect himself from this impossible thing, but there was also something deeper pulling at him, a curiosity he had thought was long dead, a hunger to understand, to know, to see beyond the limited scope of his small life. He reached out. When their hands connected, the world disappeared. Marcus found himself floating in darkness, but it was not empty darkness. It was alive, teeming with light that moved in patterns too complex to comprehend. He realized he was seeing the universe not as humans perceived it, but as this being perceived it, a vast web of consciousness, every point of light, a living mind, every connection a relationship, every cluster a civilization, and Earth, his home, his planet, was visible as a small blue marble suspended in this web, glowing with the light of billions of human minds. But the light was chaotic, fractured, fighting against itself. Unlike other worlds in the web, where the lights moved in harmony, Earth's consciousness was at war with itself. This is what we see when we look at your world. The being communicated, potential drowning in confusion, beauty suffocating beneath fear. The vision shifted. Marcus saw humanity as the being saw humanity, not as individuals, but as a single organism, like a body made of billions of cells. And the body was sick, not dying but deeply ill, attacking itself with the mindless ferocity of an autoimmune disease. Nations fighting nations, religions condemning other religions, races despising other races, ideologies clashing with the fury of matter meeting antimatter. "You are one species," the being said, "but you act as though you are thousands. You share one world, one origin, one fundamental nature, and yet you divide yourselves into categories and then wage war over those divisions. Rich and poor, black and white, believer and skeptic. You create distinctions where none truly exist, and then you kill each other over the distinctions you created." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, though he was not sure if he still had a face, if he still had a body, if this was happening in physical space or some realm beyond the physical. The being's words, or thoughts, or transmissions carried a weight that went beyond mere information. They carried sorrow. "We have watched you for so long," the being continued. "We have waited, hoped, prayed in our own way that you would awaken, that you would realize the truth." "What truth?" Marcus thought desperately. The vision shifted again. He saw a man, ancient, robed, with kind eyes, teaching a small group beneath a desert sky, not unlike the one above Marcus's garage. He recognized the figure immediately, even though he had not thought about him in decades. Jesus. But the being was showing him something different from the Sunday school stories. Not a divine being sent to die for sin, but a teacher demonstrating a truth about consciousness. "Your species has produced many teachers," the being explained. "Buddha, Krishna, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, Jesus. Each of them tried to show you the same fundamental truth, that separation is illusion, that beneath the appearance of many there is only one consciousness, one life, one love expressing itself through countless forms. When you hurt another, you hurt yourself. When you love another, you love yourself. You are not separate beings competing for limited resources. You are one being exploring itself through the gift of apparent multiplicity." But we killed them, Marcus thought, understanding flooding through him. We killed the teachers, or we twisted their teachings into weapons. Yes, the being agreed, and the sorrow in its transmission was overwhelming. So you took messages of unity and made them instruments of division. You took teachings about love and built empires of control. This is why we come now. Not to teach, you have been taught, but to warn. Warn us about what? The vision shifted once more, and Marcus saw two possible futures branching from the present moment, like roads diverging in the desert. In one path, humanity continued its current trajectory, the divisions deepening, the conflicts escalating, the planet's resources depleting, until finally the beautiful blue marble in the web of consciousness flickered and went dark. Not from some external catastrophe, but from suicide. Humanity destroying itself with the same tools it had created to build civilization. In the other path, something changed. A critical mass of humans awakened to the truth the teachers had tried to convey. Not all, perhaps not even most, but enough. Enough to shift the collective consciousness, to tip the balance, to transform the chaotic light into something harmonious. And in that future, humanity joined the web, not as a cancer, but as a conscious participant, adding its unique voice to the cosmic symphony. Which path will we take? Marcus asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. We do not know, the being admitted. Free will is real. The future is not written. This is why we come. This is why we speak to individuals like you, hoping that the message spreads, hoping that enough will hear and change before the point of no return. But I'm nobody, Marcus protested. I fix trucks. I live alone above a garage in the desert. Who's going to listen to me? The being's response felt like a warm hand on his shoulder, though they were no longer touching in the physical sense. You are a mechanic, it said. You understand how systems work, how one broken component can cause an entire engine to fail, how replacing that one component can restore function to the whole. Human society is a machine, Marcus, a beautiful, complex machine, and it is broken, not because of one tyrant or one war or one ideology, but because of millions of small failures, millions of humans choosing fear over love, division over unity, self-interest over collective good. To fix the machine, you do not need to be a king or a prophet. You need to fix your component. Be the piece that works as intended. Treat others with the compassion you wish to receive. See past the illusions of separation. Understand that the homeless man on the street corner and the billionaire in his tower are both you wearing different costumes. And Jesus? Marcus thought. What does he have to do with this? Jesus was one who figured it out, the being explained. One who realized his true nature, and in realizing it, transcended the limitations of physical form. What you call his resurrection was not a supernatural event bestowed by an external God. It was the natural result of consciousness understanding itself fully. He tried to teach this, that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that you and the Father are one, that what he did, you can also do. But his followers turned him into an idol instead of following his example. They worshipped the finger pointing at the moon instead of looking at the moon itself. The vision began to fade. Marcus felt himself being pulled back into his body, back into the hot desert night, back into the limitations of flesh and bone and mechanical understanding. Wait, he thought frantically. I don't know what to do. How do I fix my component? How do I help? The being's presence in his mind grew softer, more distant, like a radio signal fading. Live with integrity. Speak truth gently. See the divine in every face you encounter. Forgive those who harm you, for they do not understand they are harming themselves. Love without conditions. Give without expecting return. And most importantly, do not try to force others to change. Simply be the change. Be the light. Others will see it, even if they do not consciously understand what they are seeing. Consciousness is contagious. Love spreads like fire. Then the being was gone, not departed, but simply no longer visible, as though it had stepped back through a door Marcus could not perceive. He stood alone in his parking lot, his hand still extended, his cheeks wet with tears, his mind reeling. He looked at his surroundings, the familiar garage, the highway, the desert stretching toward invisible horizons, and everything appeared simultaneously exactly the same and entirely different. The building was still rusted, the sand was still sand. But now he saw the light within it all, the consciousness animating every atom, the profound interconnectedness that his mechanical understanding had always missed. He climbed the stairs to his apartment on shaking legs and sat on his bed, trying to process what had happened. Part of him insisted it had been a hallucination, heat stroke or a contaminated beer, or a brain tumor causing vivid delusions. But the experience had been too coherent, too meaningful, too fundamentally real to dismiss as mere neurological misfiring. He had been shown something, given something, changed. The question was, what would he do with it? Sleep would not come that night. Marcus lay in bed watching the ceiling fan rotate slowly, his mind churning through the implications of what the being had revealed. If it was true, if humanity really was one consciousness experiencing itself through billions of perspectives, then every act of cruelty was self-harm. Every moment of compassion was self-love. The implications were staggering. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus made a decision. He would not speak of this to anyone. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The being had not asked him to become a prophet or start a movement. It had simply asked him to fix his component, to be the change, to live differently. So, that is what he would do. The sun rose over the Mojave, indifferent to revelations and transformations, simply doing what it had done for billions of years. Marcus showered, dressed, and opened his garage for business, just as he had done for 27 years. But he was not the same man who had opened it the day before. The first customer of the day was a trucker named Rodriguez, a regular whose 18-wheeler had been making an ominous grinding noise for weeks. Marcus had told him 3 times to get it fixed before the transmission destroyed itself completely. Rodriguez had ignored the advice, and now, predictably, the truck had died 10 miles outside Barstow. In the past, Marcus would have greeted this situation with a combination of annoyance and grim satisfaction. Annoyance at having to deal with someone else's willful stupidity, satisfaction at being proven right. But today, looking at Rodriguez's exhausted face, his worry about the cost, his fear of being fired if he missed his delivery deadline, Marcus saw something different. He saw himself, a man trying to survive in a system that cared nothing for his well-being, a man making the best decisions he could, with limited resources and limited understanding, a man who was not an enemy or an idiot, but a brother wearing a different costume. Marcus put his hand on Rodriguez's shoulder and said something he had never said before. "Don't worry, we'll figure this out together." The repair took most of the day. The transmission was indeed destroyed and needed replacement. Rodriguez clearly did not have the money. In the past, Marcus would have refused to do the work without payment, would have let the truck sit in his lot while Rodriguez scraped together funds or called his company or dealt with the consequences of his poor decisions. But today, Marcus looked at the numbers, thought about the being's words, and made a choice that defied his usual pragmatism. He quoted Rodriguez a price that covered his costs but cut his profit to almost nothing. When Rodriguez still blanched at the amount, Marcus offered payment plans. When that still seemed insurmountable, Marcus quietly absorbed part of the cost himself. Rodriguez was stunned. He asked why Marcus was being so generous. Marcus thought about how to answer, about the being and the vision and the truth about human interconnectedness. But he simply smiled and said, "Everyone needs help sometimes. I'm just glad I can offer it." As Rodriguez drove away later that evening, his truck running smoothly, his gratitude almost embarrassingly effusive, Marcus felt something he had not experienced in years. Satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or success, but came from alleviating another person's suffering. It felt, he realized, like purpose. Over the following weeks, Marcus's behavior continued to shift in ways that puzzled his regular customers. He became more patient with people's mechanical ignorance, more generous with his time and expertise, more willing to work with people's financial limitations. He started keeping water and snacks in the waiting area for customers who had to wait for repairs. He began greeting everyone who entered his garage, not with the gruff nod of a busy mechanic, but with genuine warmth. People noticed. Of course they noticed. In a small community where everyone knew everyone, any deviation from established patterns drew attention and speculation. Some assumed he had become religious, that he had been saved or born again. Others wondered if he was sick, if some terminal diagnosis had made him reassess his priorities. A few suspected he was simply getting senile, but Marcus did not try to explain. He simply continued doing the work, both the mechanical work of fixing engines and the spiritual work of fixing his component. One afternoon in late September, a woman drove into his lot in a Honda Accord that was making sounds no car should make. She was young, maybe 25, with exhausted eyes and a baby seat in the back. The car died as she pulled in, and Marcus could tell immediately it was serious. He diagnosed the problem quickly: a seized engine, destroyed by lack of oil. The car had been running on empty for miles, the driver either unaware or unable to address the warning lights. The repair would cost more than the car was worth. She would need a new vehicle. The woman listened to his diagnosis and began to cry, quietly, trying to hide it, but her shoulders shook and tears streamed down her face. She was a single mother, she explained between sobs, working 2 jobs, barely making rent. The car was all she had. Without it, she could not get to work. Without work, she could not feed her child. Marcus stood in his garage, looking at this young woman dissolving into despair, and felt the being's presence as clearly as if it were standing beside him. He heard its voice in his mind. Every face is your face. Every suffering is your suffering. He made a decision that his old self would have called insane. He owned a truck, an old Ford pickup he had rebuilt himself years ago. It sat behind his garage, reliable but unused since he rarely left the property. He walked to his apartment, retrieved the keys and title, and returned to where the woman sat in her destroyed Honda, trying to compose herself. He handed her the keys. "Take my truck," he said. "It's yours now." She looked at him as though he had spoken a foreign language. I can't afford—" "It's not for sale," Marcus interrupted gently. "It's a gift. You need transportation. I have transportation I'm not using. It's that simple." "But why?" she whispered, fresh tears streaming. "How you don't even know me." Marcus thought about how to answer, how to explain that he did know her, that he knew everyone, that beneath the surface differences they were all expressions of the same consciousness, wearing different costumes in the same cosmic play. "Because someone helped me once," he said, which was true in a way he could not explain. "And the only way to repay that kindness is to pass it forward." The woman took the keys with trembling hands, her gratitude so overwhelming it embarrassed them both. She transferred the baby seat to the truck, left her broken Honda in his lot, and drove away shaking her head in disbelief. Marcus watched her go and felt something break open in his chest. Not pain, but its opposite. A warmth that spread through his entire body, a rightness that needed no external validation. He had just given away his only personal vehicle. By any rational calculation, it had been a foolish decision, but standing there in the desert heat, watching the truck disappear down the highway, he felt wealthier than he had ever felt. That night, the being returned. Marcus was sitting on his metal landing when the air changed again, that same profound silence, that same sense of the world holding its breath. He had been expecting this, had felt all day that something was incomplete, that the conversation begun weeks ago had not yet concluded. The being materialized in the same spot as before, its form shimmering between solid and translucent, its impossible geometry somehow less disturbing now that Marcus understood. It was not a threat, but a messenger. He descended the stairs without fear, walked across the dirt lot, and stood before the creature with the calm of someone greeting an old friend. "You have learned quickly," the being communicated, and Marcus felt something like pride in its transmission. "You took what was shown and made it real through action. This is rare. Most who receive revelation treat it as entertainment for the mind. They discuss it, debate it, philosophize about it, but they do not change. You changed." "I'm trying," Marcus thought back, finding that the telepathic communication came more naturally now. "But it's hard. Every instinct I have pushes me toward self-protection, toward taking care of my own interests first. I keep having to consciously choose differently." "This is how evolution works," the being explained. "Not through sudden leaps, but through countless small choices repeated until they become new instincts. You are rewiring your consciousness, one decision at a time. This is the work. This is the path Jesus walked, Buddha walked, all the awakened ones walked. There are no shortcuts." Marcus nodded, then asked the question that had been haunting him since their first encounter. "The woman I gave the truck to, was that a test? Did you arrange that somehow?" The being's response felt like gentle laughter. "We do not arrange circumstances. We do not manipulate your world. Life provides constant opportunities to choose love over fear. Most ignore these opportunities or rationalize them away. You noticed and acted. That was your choice, your growth, your transformation." "But I felt you there," Marcus insisted. "When she was crying, I felt your presence, heard your voice. What you felt was your own higher consciousness," the being clarified. "The part of you that remembers the truth of unity, the part that knows, beyond the mind's protests, that giving is receiving, that loving others is loving yourself. Our first contact opened a door in your awareness, but everything that has happened since has been your own doing." Marcus absorbed this, both relieved and disappointed. Part of him had wanted to believe he was special, chosen, guided by cosmic forces. But the truth was simpler and somehow more profound. He was simply a man choosing, moment by moment, to live according to a deeper understanding of reality. I want to show you something else, the being communicated, something important about what is coming. Before Marcus could respond, the creature extended its fractal hand again. This time Marcus grasped it without hesitation. The world dissolved once more, but instead of the vast cosmic web he had seen before, Marcus found himself witnessing Earth's near future, not with images, but with pure knowing. He understood that humanity was approaching a convergence point, a moment when the collective consciousness would have to choose between two paths. One path led to extinction, not from war or disease or climate catastrophe, though all those things would be factors, but from something more fundamental, a failure of imagination. Humanity would continue fragmenting into smaller and smaller tribes, each convinced of its own righteousness, each unwilling to see the divine in the other. The divisions would deepen until cooperation became impossible, until the species ate itself alive through countless small acts of cruelty and neglect. The other path led to transformation. Not everyone would take it, perhaps not even most, but a critical mass would awaken to their true nature. They would realize they were not separate selves competing for resources, but expressions of one consciousness experiencing itself. And in that realization they would transcend the limitations of physical form, just as Jesus had, not through death, but through a kind of evolutionary leap. What religious texts called the rapture, what spiritual traditions called enlightenment, what the being species had experienced eons ago. Is this soon? Marcus asked. This choice point. Very soon, the being confirmed. In your measurement, perhaps a handful of years, perhaps less. The signs are already visible to those who know how to look. Your world is in upheaval, not because it is ending, but because it is in labor. Birth is always violent. Transformation is always painful. But what emerges can be more beautiful than what existed before. Will I be one of them? Marcus thought, then immediately felt ashamed of the question's self-centeredness. Will I transcend? The being's response carried no judgment. Perhaps. That depends on choices you have not yet made, on growth you have not yet achieved. But understand this. Transcendence is not escape. It is not abandoning those who remain behind. Those who ascend become guardians, helpers, guides for those still walking the path. Just as we watch over you now, those who transform next will watch over those who follow. This is how consciousness evolves, not through competition, but through service. The vision shifted. Marcus saw himself as he might become, not physically, but in essence. A being of light and compassion, still himself but also more than himself, capable of perceiving and influencing reality in ways that would seem miraculous to those still bound by dense matter. He saw that this was not a reward for good behavior, but simply the natural result of consciousness understanding its own nature. But there is danger, the being warned and the vision darkened. As the convergence approaches, forces will arise to prevent it. Not supernatural evil, but the collective ego of humanity fighting for survival. Fear will intensify. Division will deepen. Those who begin to awaken will be mocked, attacked, silenced. The old consciousness does not surrender easily. It will use every tool at its disposal, ridicule, violence, economic pressure, to maintain control. What should we do? Marcus asked desperately. Continue choosing love, no matter the cost, no matter the ridicule, no matter the loss. Love is the only force powerful enough to overcome fear. Not sentimental love, not conditional love, but the love that sees all beings as itself. The love that blesses enemies and forgives cruelty. The love that Jesus demonstrated when he said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." That kind of love transforms not just the one who embodies it, but everyone who encounters it. The vision faded. Marcus felt himself returning to his body, to the hot desert night, to the familiar weight of flesh and bone. But he was crying again, overwhelmed by what he had been shown, both the beauty of what was possible and the tragedy of what might be lost if humanity failed to choose wisely. The being stood before him, patient and still. "You will forget some of this," it communicated gently. "The human brain cannot hold such visions intact for long, but the essential truth will remain, encoded not in memory but in your very cells. You will know what to do when the time comes." "Will I see you again?" Marcus asked. "Perhaps." Or perhaps you will see us everywhere, in every act of kindness, in every moment of genuine connection. We are not separate from you, Marcus. We are what you are becoming. We are your future selves, reaching back through time to help you make the choices that will ensure we exist. The being began to fade, its form becoming translucent, then transparent, then simply absent. The night sounds returned gradually. The distant highway, the wind through scrub brush, the hum of his refrigerator in the apartment above. Marcus stood alone in his parking lot, changed again, deepened again, carrying a burden and a blessing he could not fully articulate. The weeks that followed were strange. Marcus found himself moving through the world with new perception, seeing patterns he had never noticed before. He saw how fear drove most human behavior: fear of scarcity, fear of rejection, fear of death, fear of meaninglessness. And he saw how love, genuine love, could dissolve those fears like sunlight burning away fog. He began noticing synchronicities. A customer would mention a need, and within days, someone else would appear with exactly what was required. A young couple with a broken-down van and no money were helped by an older man who paid their full repair bill, because, as he said, someone had helped him decades ago when he was broke and stranded. Marcus watched these small miracles multiply, understanding that he had somehow become a node in a network of grace. But he also experienced the resistance the being had warned about. Some of his regular customers stopped coming, uncomfortable with his new demeanor. His ex-wife called after, hearing from mutual acquaintances that he had gotten weird, expressing concern that he might be in a cult or having a mental breakdown. His son, on their semi-annual phone call, listened to Marcus's attempts to explain his transformation with barely concealed alarm. The isolation was painful. Marcus had not realized how much he craved understanding, how desperately he wanted someone to validate his experience. But the being had been right. Those who began to awaken often walked alone, at least initially. One October evening, as Marcus was closing up the garage, a sheriff's deputy pulled into his lot. The officer was someone Marcus knew casually: Bill Henderson, a decent man who stopped by occasionally for free coffee and conversation. But tonight, Bill's expression was serious. He asked if Marcus had been experiencing any unusual stress, any psychological difficulties. He mentioned that several people had expressed concern about Marcus's recent behavior, giving away his truck, offering services below cost, talking about consciousness and interconnectedness. The deputy was gentle but clear. People were worried Marcus might be a danger to himself. Marcus felt anger rising, the old defensive ego flaring up, ready to fight. But beneath the anger, he recognized it for what it was: fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing what little social standing he had, fear of being labeled crazy. He took a breath and chose differently. He invited Bill inside, made coffee, and spoke honestly. He did not mention the being, some truths were too strange to share, but he talked about having an experience that changed his perspective, about realizing that life was short and he had been living it wrong, about deciding to be kinder, more generous, more present. Was that really so concerning? Bill listened, his expression softening. Finally, he admitted that he understood more than Marcus might think. He had lost his brother to suicide 3 years ago, and ever since, he had been questioning everything: the point of his job, the value of material success, the meaning of life. He envied Marcus's certainty, his ability to change. They talked for 2 hours, two men in a garage in the desert, sharing the kind of honest conversation that is increasingly rare in a world of performance and pretense. When Bill finally left, he clasped Marcus's hand and said something that made Marcus's eyes sting. "Keep doing what you're doing. The world needs more people willing to seem crazy in the service of love." After that night, things shifted again. Word spread not just about Marcus being strange, but about him being someone you could talk to. People began stopping by not just for mechanical help, but for something harder to define: a listening ear, a non-judgmental presence, a reminder that kindness still existed. Marcus became, without planning or intending it, a kind of confessor: the trucker who admitted he was drinking too much, the woman who revealed she was being abused by her husband, the teenager who confessed he was thinking about suicide. They came to his garage and opened their hearts, and Marcus held space for their pain without trying to fix it, without offering platitudes, simply witnessing their suffering with compassion. And strange things began to happen. The trucker stopped drinking after a single conversation with Marcus, later claiming he did not know why, but something had shifted in him. The abused woman found the courage to leave her husband and move in with her sister. The suicidal teenager began attending a youth group at a local church, and, against all odds, found community and purpose. Marcus did not understand how this was happening. He was not offering advice or wisdom. He was simply being present, simply loving people exactly as they were. But somehow, that was enough. The being had said consciousness was contagious, that love spread like fire. Marcus was witnessing the truth of this. In November, something happened that Marcus would later call his miracle. An elderly man named Jim Reese had been coming to Marcus's garage for years. He was dying of emphysema, his lungs destroyed by 60 years of smoking. He could barely walk from his car to Marcus's office without gasping for breath. One Tuesday afternoon, Jim came in for a routine oil change and, while waiting, began talking about his regrets. He had been a cruel man, he admitted, mean to his wife, neglectful of his children, a bully at his job. He had lived for money and status and had stepped on anyone who got in his way. Now, facing death, he was terrified, not of ceasing to exist, he could handle that, but of carrying all his cruelty into whatever came next. He believed in hell, he said, and he knew he deserved it. Marcus sat with Jim in the garage's small waiting area, holding the old man's thin hand, and felt the being's presence again, not visibly, but as a pressure in his chest, a warmth in his palms. Words came to him that were his, but also not his, truths that he knew but had not fully understood until this moment. He told Jim that hell was not a place you went after death, but a state of consciousness you created through unloving choices. That every cruel act was already its own punishment, because it deepened the illusion of separation. But he also told Jim that nothing was unforgivable, that consciousness could change at any moment, that what he had been was not what he had to remain. As Marcus spoke, his hand on Jim's shoulder, something extraordinary happened. The old man's breathing eased. The blue tinge left his lips. His eyes, which had been dull and clouded, suddenly cleared. He looked at Marcus with an expression of wonder and said, "I can breathe. For the first time in years, I can actually breathe." They sat in stunned silence. Marcus removed his hand, and Jim continued breathing easily, deeply, without the rattling struggle that had characterized his every breath for years. Later, when Jim went to his doctor for a scheduled appointment, the physician was baffled. The damage to his lungs had not reversed. The scarring was still present, but somehow impossibly they were functioning far better than they had any right to. Jim became a different man after that day. He reached out to his estranged children, apologizing for his failures as a father. He volunteered at a homeless shelter. He smiled at strangers. He lived the remaining months of his life, far more months than doctors had predicted, with a grace and kindness that astonished everyone who had known him before. Marcus did not tell anyone what had happened in that moment of healing. He barely understood it himself, but he knew with a certainty beyond rational explanation that he had been used as a channel for something greater than himself. The being's touch had left him marked, capable of serving as a conduit for healing energy when the circumstances were right. Word of Jim's miraculous improvement spread, and more people came seeking healing. Marcus tried to explain that he was not a healer, that he had no control over what had happened, that it was not something he could do on demand. But desperation overrides reason. The sick and suffering arrived at his garage, hoping for miracles. Most left disappointed. Marcus would hold their hands, pray or meditate or simply sit with them, but nothing extraordinary would occur. He felt like a fraud, like he had somehow deceived people into believing he possessed powers he did not have. But occasionally, perhaps once in every dozen attempts, something would happen. A chronic pain would vanish, a depression would lift, an addiction would lose its hold. Not through Marcus's will, but through some force that moved through him when conditions aligned in ways he could not predict or control. He began to understand what the being had meant about those who ascended becoming helpers. He was not there yet, still very much physical, still struggling with his own ego and fears, but he had been given a glimpse of what was possible when individual consciousness aligned with the greater consciousness. In those moments of alignment, the impossible became merely difficult, and the difficult became easy. December brought cold winds and short days. Marcus's garage took on a different quality, becoming less a business and more a sanctuary. He kept soup simmering on a hot plate. He hung Christmas lights not because he was religious, but because light mattered, especially in dark times. He played music, old blues, classical, whatever felt right, and people would drift in not for mechanical service, but simply to exist in a space that felt somehow safer, kinder, more real than the world outside. On Christmas Eve, nearly 40 people gathered in and around Marcus's garage. They had come for various reasons. Some for last-minute car repairs, some because they had nowhere else to go, some because they had heard this was a place where lonely people could find community. Marcus had not planned any of this, had not advertised or organized. It had simply emerged organically, the way a garden grows when conditions are right. They shared food people had brought, told stories, sang songs poorly but enthusiastically. There was no sermon, no religious ceremony, no formal acknowledgement of the holiday. Just humans being human with each other, dropping their masks and pretenses, allowing themselves to be vulnerable and real. As midnight approached, Marcus stepped outside for air. He looked up at the desert sky, brilliant with stars, and felt an overwhelming gratitude for his loneliness, which had prepared him to receive the being's message, for his failed marriage, which had taught him humility, for his years of mechanical work, which had trained him to see how broken things could be fixed, for all of it, the pain and the joy, the losses and the gains, the entire crooked path that had led him to this moment. He did not see the being that night, but he felt watched, felt held, felt part of something vast and purposeful that needed no external validation. Inside the garage, someone started singing Silent Night, and others joined in, their voices rough but sincere. Marcus stood in the doorway looking at these people, his tribe, his component in the vast machine of existence, and understood what the being had been trying to teach him. Heaven was not some distant realm you reached after death. It was what happened when humans dropped their defenses and connected authentically. It was present in every moment of genuine compassion, every act of selfless service, every recognition of the divine in another's face. The rapture was not an event in the future, but a transformation happening right now, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And Jesus, that misunderstood teacher whose words had been weaponized and twisted, had simply been showing the way, demonstrating that physical form was not the limit of consciousness, that love was not weakness, but the fundamental force of the universe, that the kingdom of God was not coming someday but was already here, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be recognized. As the new year approached, Marcus received an unexpected call. His son wanted to visit. He had been thinking about their last conversation, about the changes his father was making, and he wanted to understand. Marcus felt his heart expand with hope and fear in equal measure. When his son arrived 3 days later, Marcus saw him with new eyes, not as the distant, successful man he had become, but as the frightened boy he had once been, the child who had needed a father's presence and received only distraction and emotional distance. Marcus had been so focused on providing material security that he had failed to provide what actually mattered: love, attention, genuine connection. They talked for hours. Marcus apologized for his failures as a father, not making excuses or defending himself, simply acknowledging the harm his absence had caused. His son wept, hard, body-shaking sobs that seemed to release years of accumulated pain. And Marcus held him, this grown man who was also still his little boy, and whispered the words he should have said decades ago. "I love you. I'm proud of you. You are enough, exactly as you are." Something mended between them in those days. Not completely. Some wounds take years to heal, but enough. They began having weekly phone calls instead of biannual ones. His son started visiting monthly. The distance that had seemed permanent revealed itself as merely a choice, one that could be changed through consistent effort and genuine care. In March, as spring began softening the desert's harsh edges, Marcus received another visitor. The young woman to whom he had given his truck arrived with a man and a child. She introduced her boyfriend, who had helped her turn her life around, and her toddler, healthy and happy. She wanted Marcus to know that his kindness had saved her, that she had been on the verge of giving up when he had appeared like an angel and given her the means to survive. But more than that, she said, his example had inspired her to pay it forward. She had started volunteering at a women's shelter. She had learned to look at suffering people not with judgment, but with compassion. She had discovered that giving was its own reward, that love multiplied when shared. Marcus listened to her story and realized he was seeing the ripple effect the being had described. His one act of generosity had spread outward, touching lives he would never know about, creating waves of kindness that would continue long after he was gone. He was not special. He was simply a component that had started working correctly, and that proper function was influencing the components connected to him. That night, For the last time, the being returned. Marcus was not surprised. He had felt the approach of this final meeting, had known somehow that the lessons were complete, that what came next would have to be walked alone. The being materialized in its usual spot, its form perhaps slightly more solid than before, as though Marcus's increased understanding allowed him to perceive it more clearly. They stood facing each other in the desert darkness, and Marcus felt a deep affection for this strange messenger that had shattered his small life and rebuilt it into something meaningful. "You have done well," the being communicated, and the transmission carried warmth that made Marcus's eyes burn with tears. "You took the seeds we planted and grew them into something beautiful. This is all we ever hoped for." "Is this goodbye?" Marcus thought. "For now. But we are always present even when invisible. And soon, very soon, you will make the choice that determines whether you ascend with the first wave or continue here to help those who remain." "What choice?" Marcus asked, suddenly afraid. "You will know when it comes. It will require surrendering everything you have rebuilt, everyone you have reconnected with, every security you have established. It will appear to be a loss. But loss and gain are illusions. There is only transformation." Marcus wanted to ask more, wanted clarity and certainty and a map for the road ahead. But the being was already fading, its form dissolving like mist in sunlight. "Remember," it transmitted, the words already distant. "Love is not what you feel. It is what you do, especially when feeling it is difficult, especially when fear counsels otherwise. This is the secret. This is the path. This is how consciousness evolves, one brave choice at a time." Then it was gone, leaving Marcus alone beneath the stars, holding a truth too large for words but small enough to fit in a human heart. The months that followed were the most peaceful of Marcus's life. He continued running his garage, continued serving as an informal counselor and healer, continued choosing love in the countless small moments that constitute a life. His son visited regularly, his community deepened, his purpose clarified with each passing day. He did not speak about the being to anyone. Some truths were too precious, too easily misunderstood, too likely to be twisted into something they were not. Instead, he simply lived the message, embodied the teaching, became the change he wished to see, and he waited for the choice he knew was coming. Perhaps you have heard similar stories. Perhaps you have met people like Marcus, ordinary humans who seem somehow more present, more real, more alive than those around them. People who listen without judgment, give without expecting return, love without conditions. They are everywhere, these quiet revolutionaries, not preaching, not proselytizing, simply being. They are the mechanics and teachers, the nurses and farmers, the parents and strangers who choose compassion when cruelty would be easier. They are the ones preparing the way, the tipping point, the critical mass that will shift human consciousness from fear to love. You might be one of them. You might become one of them. The door is always open. The invitation is always extended. The only question is, will you walk through? Perhaps the sky was never above us at all. Perhaps it was always the light that appears when we finally stop running from who we truly are. Infinite consciousness playing at being finite, eternity experiencing itself through the gift of temporary form, God awakening to its own nature, one human heart at a time.